I see you dancing, I'm like, hola, 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 hola. With your move fancy, make me wanna hola, 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 hola. I got your attention, spending that moolah, 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 moolah. I'm a drop popping pocket, swola, 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 swola.
You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristadoulou.
Swola, 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 swola.
There we go. All right, we are good to go. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. It is Thursday, April 15th, 2021. Welcome back to another episode of the Greeks Gridiron. Took a little break on Monday, had some stuff going on, so I was not able to get the show up and running for you guys. I hope for anyone that watched enjoyed the little Pittsburgh Steelers breakdown video. That was kind of like a replacement for it. So, what are we talking about today? What has been going on in the NFL? Well, there's quite a bit going on, and I actually have my co-host here, Eli Bieberman. He's ready to roll here a little bit earlier than I was expecting him to be, so he'll be joining for pretty much everything that we're about to talk about here. So we'll start things off right away. I'm just going to go ahead and pull him in, and of course, this is all going to act real funny here. I'm going to put up the audio. Pull you in, full screen that. Should be good to go there. Of course, my camera's not showing up, because why would it be? Here, I'm going to pull you in 1 second. Close-up cam properties. There we go. I'll take this out of there. And we should be good to go. I'm going to flip this over. Perfect. And we are good to go. So this will be a little bit different of a show because now I can talk to you about some of the other things that are going on too. So there's a lot going on. It has been a pretty wild, I would say, week for the NFL. Julian Edelman retired. The NFL and the NFLPA are kind of in like a wrestling match right now, trying to decide what exactly is going to be going on with the offseason program this year. So there's plenty of us to talk about. The Browns found their pass rusher to go alongside Myles Garrett there, so we'll get into that a little bit as well. So first things first, we'll talk about kind of what's making the headlines here. We'll talk the question of the day. And Eli, I'm actually curious as to what your thoughts are going to be on this as well. Question of the day being, what makes a player Hall of Fame worthy to you in the NFL? And is Julian Edelman a Hall of Fame player or not? This is a question that I think has kind of rattled the internet. I've been looking just through threads on Twitter and, anything that has a column with a comment section down at the bottom. It seems that everyone is in like a disagreement on whether Julian Edelman should be in the Hall of Fame or not. I'm going to start my opinion by saying that I think he is a Patriot Hall of Famer. As for an actual Hall of Fame career, in my opinion, based off of his body of work, and we'll talk about the numbers in a second, based off his body of work, regular season numbers, maybe not as high as you'd want, but his postseason numbers, and on top of that, just like the importance in some of the winning teams that he was a part of, you can't really, like, it speaks to the Hall of Fame. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes. And that's not to say that players like Hines Ward or a lot of people, I saw Lynn Swann's name kept coming up a lot. It's not to say that those players don't belong in the Hall of Fame. I think people need to sit back and realize that there's still 5 years that have to go by before Edelman can even be like allowed to be discussed about as the Hall of Famer. So I'm curious to see what you think, Eli. You're a Patriots fan, so maybe you're a little biased on this or not. We'll see. But what do you think as far as Edelman's Hall of Fame worthiness?
Yeah, I think you said it best. He's a surefire Patriots Hall of Famer. His jersey is going to be hanging up in the rafters at Gillette for years to come. So that's not in question. But I think it really boils down to a question of how important is team success when you're talking about somebody's Hall of Fame career, because he was a massive contributor to multiple Super Bowl teams, got the Super Bowl MVP on his resume. While his numbers don't really jump off the page at you, what he meant to that organization went beyond just the numbers. It went to a place of heart. Like, he was somebody who's out there every single day working his butt off. Now, I know, you can say anyone from the practice squad all the way up to the best player works hard, but the way having watched him in New England for all these years, the way the team really rallied around him, and the way he impacted the organization beyond just on the field production, which he was incredibly productive. Also got a very late start to his career. At the beginning of his career, he was a special team guy and was drafted as a quarterback who was going to transition to wide receiver. So it took him a few years before he was fully able to take over. And it wasn't really until the departure of Wes Welker that we really saw him take over that slot role and really shine in it. But the reality of the situation is, if he had gotten probably a full career, every single year he spent, he was a contributing player, like, we probably wouldn't even be having this discussion.
Yeah.
Obviously his numbers would be a lot bigger, but whether he's a Hall of Famer, I go back and forth a lot on this one. I really don't think there's a right answer. I also don't think there's a wrong answer. For me personally, I want him to be in the Hall of Fame, but I don't think he will end up getting in the Hall of Fame. We see guys like Terrell Owens, his first go around didn't get in, and everyone saw that as a huge travesty. Terrell Owens has twice the numbers that Julian Edelman has, even though he didn't really have the postseason success Edelman did. But we see a guy like Reggie Wayne just got in the recent class. Reggie Wayne is somebody with significantly better numbers, playing with Peyton Manning all those years.
Yeah.
But it's a tough one. I'm going to say probably not on the Hall of Fame train.
You think so? Probably not. So that's fair. That's a fair argument. I'm kind of in the same seat as you. I try to be unbiased when I come up with the opinions on this, because as somebody who grew up in New England and I'm not a Patriots fan, I feel like I watched Julian Edelman win Super Bowls for New England. And dude, that catch against the Falcons was probably one of the craziest catches you'll ever see ever. And is that luck-based more so than anything? Yeah, I mean, of course, but he still made the catch regardless. And just some of the numbers that I pulled up here, and I saw this conversation kind of going back and forth, and I'm curious kind of how your thought is on this. Some people were like, oh, well, you can't really account for playoff stats because not everyone was there. The way I see it is, if you're putting up playoff numbers, your team's there, you belong there, I feel like you should be accounting the numbers or not. His playoff stats are unbelievable. He's second to literally Jerry Rice in everything. I mean, receptions at 118, second most. 1,442 yards, second most. He only has 5 touchdowns, but the yards and the catches are enough on their own. He doesn't need the touchdowns. And then on top of that, he has 6 100-yard games in the playoffs out of 19 total, which is second most. I mean, when you think of what football is, and I'm not arguing my case here, but the way this is just kind of my thought process. The way I think of football is the goal is to win a Super Bowl as a team. And, at the end of the day, are you contributing to your team? Are you putting up the numbers when it matters most? And Edelman did. So like you said, I don't think there's really a right or wrong to the whole answer. I think it's more so that, it's more of the beauty is in the eye of the beholder more so. I mean, I think a lot of Patriots fans will pound the table, screaming at the top of their lungs that Edelman belongs in there. And then I think he's also going to suffer from the fact that he was on such a successful Patriots team that some people are going to argue, well, he wasn't necessarily the guy always. He was like Brady's security blanket, with Rob Gronkowski being the guy for them, But I think Edelman has a case, whether he gets in or not. He's definitely not a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's probably not a second or a third. Could I see him eventually because of just how great he was in the playoffs? I mean, yeah. I don't know. I just think of some Hall of Famers, you think of them and some of the big moments that they had. Edelman has so many that he fits the bill in that sense. I guess he is just missing some of the numbers. But Julian Edelman's retired. What do you think about that? How do you feel? Did you expect him to retire?
I knew it was coming sooner rather than later, especially with the reports out these past few weeks about his knee problems. Obviously, he didn't play a whole lot last year, but with his advanced age and the beating he's taken over the years, being a guy in the slot, he's taken a beating these past few years. And so I don't blame him for retiring. I think it's probably the best for him. Could we see Gronkowski too, where he retires for a couple of years and all of a sudden, oh, I got the itch back. Let me go somewhere and win a Super Bowl real quick. I don't think that's out of the question. Brady doesn't have a few years left in him, as much as we'd like to think he does, but I don't think he's going back to be with Brady. But we could see him come back. I don't think it's out of the question. Let his body heal for a couple of years, be with his family, and then go try it. But I mean, for the Patriots, it doesn't really impact your bottom line too much. He probably wasn't going to factor in hugely this season, with Jacoby Myers really establishing himself as a solid slot presence towards the end of last year. with the second year coming in with Cam Newton, building that rapport even further, plus the additions of Aguilar and Bourne. So he didn't really factor in massively into the Patriots. I think this will lead the Patriots. Maybe they grab a receiver in the draft that they wouldn't have before. I have a couple guys whose names I've circled that I'll talk a little bit about a little bit later. But yeah, I don't think it really impacts the bottom line. Obviously, you're sad to see him go. What he meant to this franchise for so long, but you wish him the best of luck. He's always been a class act, so you wish him the best of luck in whatever he does next.
You mentioned the wide receiver acquisitions that they made. I almost feel like they kind of had a hunch that this might have been coming. Like they knew more than everyone else did. I mean, just the fact, because I remember thinking too, when they were pulling in, they brought in Aguilar and they brought in Kendrick Bourne. I'm thinking, okay, if they're probably going to keep someone if they're going to keep anyone within a real rotational spot that's probably going to get some catches still this year, it'll probably be Jacoby Myers, in my opinion, just because I feel like he was probably the better receiver you guys had. Maybe you have a better idea. Just from what I've seen from Jacoby, I thought he did really well, but it almost feels like they kind of had an idea. Outside of the Julian Edelman stuff, I'm curious to see what you think about this one here. Myles Garrett finally has somebody playing alongside him. Jadeveon Clowney signed a 1-year, $10 million deal. I look at this as a super underrated signing. A lot of people look at Clowney and say he's a bust. He did not end up being, what it was that everyone expected him to be. And while I say that might be a fair assessment, I also look at that as maybe more so of he wasn't there, but he does have the pressures. He didn't get the sack numbers you'd want, but he's a force to be reckoned with regardless. He can eat up blocks. If he can even just pull some of the attention away from Myles Garrett, I think that this is going to be huge. And the Browns have been chasing him for the last 2 years. So this is a big win for them, in my opinion. And I'm curious to see what you think on that.
Yeah, I think it was a home run signing. Even though Jadeveon Clowney hasn't had the career a lot of people thought he would. The sack numbers have never really been there in the droves you thought they would be with his athletic profile coming out of South Carolina. But he's been a solid player. He's been good in the run, which is something that Cleveland struggled mightily with last year. So bringing in him opposite Myles Garrett, I think it'll make Myles Garrett better too. Myles Garrett, just the amount of offensive linemen they're throwing at him on any given play is obscene. So having another guy with some talent on the other side, I think it can help both of them. I think they can play together really well. I think this was one of the biggest needs I had circled for Cleveland outside of defensive back, which they did a great job addressing, and bringing in John Johnson and Troy Hill, both out of Los Angeles. So I think that the Cleveland Browns have hit a home run this free agency. Cleveland's looking very scary. If Baker Mayfield can have the type of season that I think he's capable of, having watched a lot of him play in college, I think Cleveland could be very scary next year.
Ben, I hate being like the hype train follower of the offseason, because this is like, how good, whoever wins the offseason never actually turns out to be a winner in the regular season. But man, like, it feels like all the pieces that Cleveland added just made them better. There was no real losses to the team. I think that, going into this with Jadeveon Clowney now, even if Clowney doesn't get more than 5 sacks, he's going to eat up blocks, and Myles Garrett should be on tap for having a really strong season. And I'm pretty excited to see how that ends up working out for them. I think that Cleveland's winning the AFC North this year. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Pittsburgh took a big step back this year. Baltimore really didn't do anything to address their holes that I thought was significant enough to really change the tide on that. I think Sammy Watkins was a good buy low signing for them, but at the same time, I don't think he's really a guy who moves the needle for a very poor receiving core. Outside of Hollywood Brown, like, you don't really have that go-to type of receiver. So
yeah,
I think Baltimore is still going to be in the playoff picture. I think Baltimore still has a strong chance to win a wild card, especially if Lamar Jackson has a season more similar to his production 2 years ago as opposed to last year, which I think he definitely can. Especially with, I think Mark Ingram was at the end of his road. I think having him move on and giving more carries and more attention to J.K. Dobbins was an absolute win for them. So I think Baltimore is going to be good. I think Cleveland has to be seen as the favorite coming into it.
Yeah, definitely with you on that one. So
yeah, now that they address some of the things, they don't really have any significant holes that you can point to. And
oh
say,
yeah,
this
like
is gonna sink
going into
team.
going into the draft. I mean, when I did their draft breakdown a couple of weeks ago, and I almost felt like I was like splitting hairs trying to figure out, okay, like what is it exactly that they need to go after? And I mean, they're almost looking at like best player available, which is really good for the Browns because and I mean that in like a good way. They're not like reloading best player available. They're like almost restocking to just get back into it. So outside of Jadeveon Clowney and Julian Edelman, this is something that's kind of been low-key under the radar and I think is about to rear an ugly head here in the next few weeks. And I almost feel like we're kind of in for a little bit of a drama-filled offseason with teams. The NFL just announced yesterday, because yesterday was Wednesday, yes. So in a memo sent to all the teams that the offseason program is going to be 9 weeks long. All portions except for phase 3, which is a mini camp from May 24th to June 18th, are going to be voluntary. The NFLPA did not agree to any of this. They just put it all together and like sent it out to the teams, just flat out. We're like, this is what we're doing, and kind of trying to like almost put a foot down. NFLPA didn't agree to it, but apparently in the CBA that they have, the league has the right to just kind of implement rules left and right, however they want to regarding the offseason, which is pretty wild because I don't understand why the Players Association is going to allow for a decision-making system like that if that's not going to benefit players at all. Players from the Broncos, Seahawks, Bucks, Lions, Pats, they all announcing that they're probably going to be foregoing the optional weeks and only showing up for anything that's actually mandatory. And then after that, and then listen to this, and then after that, the NFL in a memo stated that any workout injuries outside of anything, like outside the facility, and that also includes like even if they're just working out on their own to try to stay in shape, if it's not approved by a head coach and it's outside the facility, they're not covered by anything. So like no insurance, nothing like that. I'm curious to see if this ends up being like a drama-filled thing. One of the things that I noted that happened last year, Rob Gronkowski, and this is why I'm assuming the league is kind of trying to pound their fists on the table about this, is I don't know if you knew this, Gronkowski faked his workout videos from the summer. In one day,
Yeah, I heard about that. It's the most Rob Gronkowski thing I've ever heard.
Literally the most Rob Gronkowski thing. He apparently just threw on a bunch of different shirts in one day and did a bunch of the drills he was supposed to do. So he had one long-ass workout day, and then after that, just kind of let it go. He was just done. And that's why he looked so slow early on in the season, which is hilarious because if anyone's going to do that and get away with it, it's Gronk. What do you think about this? I'm shocked that, like, I don't understand how the NFL, and this just brings up so many questions about the NFLPA because I don't really understand why they're why in the CBA that they just recently signed that they gave the league rights to just kind of, flip-flop offseason rules like that left and right. And then do you think like more players are going to end up sitting out from this? Because that's going to affect chemistry, the ability for players to learn if they're coming onto new teams, and like the dynamic of players sitting out and then the other ones that didn't want to sit out but feel like they have to sit out. This is just like, it feels like drama just waiting to happen through the entire offseason.
Yeah, what I think we're going to see is a lot more player-driven workouts. Like we see last year when Tom Brady went to Tampa, the first thing he did was grab all his receivers, grab his offensive line, and say, okay, come meet me here. We're all going to do a workout together. Mm-hmm. I think we're going to see a lot more things like that. Like I know a couple weeks ago, there was this big thing that Jarrett Stidham and all the new Patriots receivers were working out in California. We're going to see a lot more things like that coming up soon. I don't think we're done seeing opt-outs. I think we're going to see a lot more opt-outs. But I just think the league kind of hurt itself on this one. They just made it more difficult for them to really change anything going forward. They kind of just put it without really like getting any player input on it and said, this is the way it's going to be. And if you don't like it, tough. And so I think this is a way of players kind of getting some of that power back that they're losing from the league, kind of just taking it and say, okay, we're going to work out the way we want to work out. As for team chemistry, I think that could have an effect. But also it could be a net positive at the end of the day because it'll allow them to work out to really build those connections outside of the facility. So doing like a private workout, like Jarrett Stidham throwing with Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, something like that really helps build chemistry more because you're spending your own personal time. You're making a choice to be there instead of forcing people into a room together and then they leave the room and then goodbye. But it really forces them to get closer outside of the facility as more individuals rather than just teammates.
That's a really good point. I didn't even think about like the player workouts and stuff like that. That's actually a really good point. My thing is, I wonder if this is gonna, because it, and this is like another thing of contention that I've just read, because I follow a bunch of players on Twitter, and every now and again you see some of the things that they say, and it almost feels like there's like a sense of like, okay, these are all voluntary, but are we going to like lose a starting spot because we don't go to these voluntary workouts? Because like the NFL almost like blankets all this stuff as like, oh, it's all voluntary. But if you don't show up for, let's see, what is it? The non-voluntary is May 24th to June 18th. So that's like 3 weeks roughly. So if you don't show up the first 6 weeks, then you show up the last 3, and some young guy's been killing it for the last 6 weeks, like, do you end up losing your starting spot, or like, is your job on the line now? I think a lot of players are just kind of like frustrated with that. And man, it's a very interesting dynamic. I think we're going to get some drama out of this. I hope that teams Daniel Jones did something like that too with his wide receivers like a few weeks ago. He got together with a few of them. Carson Wentz, I think, was working out with Michael Pittman and somebody else from the Colts too. So I'm definitely excited to see how that works out. We're in a very weird position, I think, right now. The pandemic has really kind of like flipped the way the offseason stuff is going to work for the NFL, I think, going forward. I think some changes are going to have to be made because I think a lot worked last year. You could tell the teams didn't have like the in-person work that they needed because it felt like the first few weeks were a little bit slow and sloppy, but as things picked up, like the Buccaneers are a prime example of that. They had a pretty big turnover point at the quarterback position, and once they really got things clicking, they never lost another game. So I'm curious to see how this works out. I'm definitely going to follow this and see like if any sort of drama comes from it. I've read some people saying that like maybe the players head to like a holdout or something like that, where, you know, they don't like what's going on in the CBA and maybe they do some sort of crazy holdout type situation. I'm not for that, but my God, would that be that would be rather surprising. You think the players would do a holdout? Because I know that if the league shuts down, it's a lockout. If the players don't do anything, it's a holdout.
Right. I don't think it'll get to that point where we have a legitimate holdout, like maybe having to put the season on hold, like that type of thing. I don't think we're going to get to that point. I do think that the players are going to force the league's hand a little bit. They're going to do what they're doing now, kind of opting out, like not letting the league kind of control everything. And the league's going to have to make some tough decisions where they may have to do something they don't want to do in order to make sure the players are happy, involved, getting everything they need. And so I think the league is not in the great position right now in terms of having that ability to be that huge controlling figure that they clearly want to be. We see, like, especially recently in the past few years, we see a lot more players being a lot more vocal about things than we've seen in the past, being a lot more vocal about demanding trades, wanting out of situations. So there is this movement of bringing power to the players in a league that's been so owner-driven for a while that, like, when we think of teams, like, there are some teams that we think of owners before players, like the Cowboys. Like, when you say Cowboys, people think Jerry Jones. Yeah. And so it's a very owner-driven league. But recently I've seen like a shift where the players are trying to take back some of the power they've been stripped of for so long.
Yeah, I agree with that shift. I know that a lot of like old heads are almost like the players should be, you know, happy they're making all this money, but at the end of the day, like, they are getting their asses kicked sometimes, and it's like, you know, I think that the players do deserve to have a little more say than they're given. I'm curious to see how this changes the NFL. We're in a really weird place right now. As like the world evolves and times are changing, you're starting to see like the leagues change too. And players are definitely starting to get more of a say. Like you see with Russell Wilson coming out in his interviews talking about, you know, blatantly just calling out the poor ability to build a line around him. And that's a whole other conversation on whether you can say that that's Russell Wilson's fault or not with all the money he makes. But we'll leave that conversation for another day. So let's get into the meat and the potatoes of the Patriots, man, because so much has gone on for them this offseason. I did like an offseason breakdown about a month ago when they first did all their signings, literally almost like a month to today. But I want to talk about their draft. I want to talk about kind of what they have going on. They are the darlings of free agency. They have made moves all over the place. So for those of you that aren't following the NFL, they have signed Matthew Judon, Kyle Van Noy. This is not everyone. These are just like the big names. Kyle Van Noy, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Nelson Aguilar, Devon Godchow, Trent Brown, Ted Karras. Trent Brown came from a trade. They were also able to retain David Andrews, James White, Lawrence Guy, J.C. Jackson, Cam Newton. The only real losses for the team were Joe Thuney, who ended up going to the Chiefs, Julian Edelman, who retired, and Patrick Chung, who also retired. And Julian Edelman didn't even play a full season last year. Patrick Chung didn't even play last year. And with all of that, and literally 3 losses to the, 15 names I just read off there, 12 names, they still have $16 million in cap space remaining. I don't even know how that works. Because everyone was talking about, they spent so much money, but they're sitting here with $16 million in cap space still remaining. That's absurd. They could literally go and sign somebody else if they really wanted to at this point. For their team needs, I'll give you mine, and then I'm curious to see what you have to say about this. This is what I've identified as, and I kind of changed this up literally after Julian Edelman announced his retirement. I have quarterback circled because, as everyone seems to think, it's like a mixed bag of reviews on Cam Newton. Wide receiver, I think, has sprung a little bit more importance now. They did sign Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar, but I think outside of them two, you can't really rely on everybody else too much. Jacoby Myers, maybe. The safety position with the loss of Patrick Chung. And then I wrote interior defensive line on here because I think that, you guys lost Adam Butler, replacing him with Devon Godchow, I think is that's about like equatable, but you could still maybe get somebody else in there with, the ability to draft the way you guys can since you signed so much in free agency. What are you looking at for team needs?
For team needs, yeah. My top 3 are pretty much the same as your top 3. Obviously, quarterback's the number 1. I think Cam Newton could be really good next year, having a full off season instead of the late off season he got with the Patriots last year. Having a full season, knowing the system, knowing what to expect, building some of that chemistry. Obviously, the offense is going to look a little bit different with 4 new weapons who are probably going to be starting for him next year. But I think this could be a really good year for Cam Newton. I think Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, bringing back the 2 tight end monster in New England, is really going to make a humongous impact. I think it'll make a huge impact on the running game as well. The running game was solid, if not unspectacular, last year. Damian Harris showed that he could be that bell cow type of back, given the right opportunity. Obviously, they made some changes to their offensive line. I think all of them are net positive, like bringing back a guy like Trent Brown was really good, bringing back a guy, Ted Karras, who they call Steady Teddy for good reason. Nice steady force who can play a bunch of different positions on that offensive line. Really good. One of the better backup offensive linemen in the league, in my opinion. You got a really good but young offensive line with guys like Michael Onwenu, Isaiah Wynn. So I think we could really see like an improvement in the running game. Also, wide receiver, they did add a couple guys. I think Bourne, Aguilar, and Myers is a significantly better top 3 receiving core than you had last year. Because last year, after Edelman went down, all you really had was Myers, N'Keal Harry, who's about as inconsistent as they come, never really has gotten that production that they've wanted to out of their former first-round pick. Then after that, it was just kind of a laundry list of Husu guys signed off the practice squad, guys coming from all over the place.
Who was that guy? The guy number 89, I think was his number. Was it something? Demetrius Byrd? Is that what his name was?
Yeah, Demarius Byrd.
Demarius
he's gone.
Byrd. Oh, okay, he's not even on the team anymore. All right.
Yeah, he's gone. So I think that's the big reason why they gave so much money to Aguilar. They want a guy in that Demarius Byrd role. Demarius Byrd was to take the top off the kind of defense kind of guy. That's what Nelson Aguilar does the best. He's great at taking the top off the defense. But I could definitely see them taking one of the later receivers. I don't see them taking a top receiver unless a guy like Jamar Chase has an unbelievable fall and somehow is available at 15, which I doubt he will be. I don't think Devontae Smith is going to be there. Jalen Waddle might be, but I don't know how high Bill Belichick is on a small guy like Jalen Waddle. It'll be interesting to see. But I don't personally have interior defensive line as an issue. I think they did a really good job of addressing that this offseason. Lawrence Guy, who was there last year, was pretty much like their most steady contributor on that. He's honestly was one of their best defenders last year on a weak defensive line. But adding a guy like Davin Godchow and another guy who doesn't get mentioned enough, who I think was a really, really solid pickup, was Henry Anderson coming over from the Jets.
Yeah.
He played for Indianapolis for a bit. I think, although he's not really like a star, he's not really a starting type of guy. I think he's a really solid piece.
Mm-hmm. He's a good rotational player. He never lived up to what Indianapolis expected him to be, but he was definitely a really good rotational player. He's not somebody that you're going to count on to be like a 3-down guy, but plug and play, he can do a solid job for what it needs to be done.
Exactly. Last year we saw with the Patriots, whenever Lawrence Guy wasn't in the game, coming out to grab a breather, we saw they would just get run over immediately. Yeah. So bringing in a guy like Henry Anderson can spell your starters for a couple plays, but not really have that huge drop off would be absolutely massive. They signed him for a 2-year, $7 million, $3 million guaranteed. So he's barely making any money. Good, solid roster piece, well respected in the locker room. So that's another solid piece. Also adding in the edge rushers. Bringing in Matthew Judon, bringing back Kyle Van Noy to add to Uche Winovich and Anfernee Jennings, and obviously Dante Hightower coming back too. I think all that helps too, because their linebacking core was as porous as you could possibly find last year. They were not very good. So bringing in a bunch of different guys with a lot of different versatility really helps that interior defensive line as well. But also, I feel like they definitely need to address the cornerback/safety position. They need to bring in another defensive back. McCourty can opt out after next year. So he's getting towards the end of his career too, not as young as he once was. So maybe finding a guy that would replace him. I know they brought in Kyle Duggar last year, who showed some flashes last year of being a really solid player in this league, but still has some development to go depending on how Belichick sees him. I think they could target a guy. I have a couple safeties they could target as well. And with the unknown of Stephon Gilmore's situation, people still see him as one of the biggest trade chips in the league right now. So the unknown of that also would lead me to believe that they're probably going to be targeting a corner in this draft. Again, maybe a 2nd or 3rd round corner, unless one of the top corners ends up falling them at 15, maybe a J.C. Horn, maybe a Caleb Farley type. But yeah, those are my biggest needs on the team right now.
All right. So we're kind of on the same page. Now, the only reason I put the interior defensive line on there is because everything that I listen to, and I feel like it's just because Patriots fans have become so accustomed to like the Patriots doing this in the first round, is everyone keeps saying interior defensive line in the first round. I was listening to 98.5 the other day, and they were like, wouldn't it be such a Patriots thing if they went and just, they went and drafted, the best interior defensive line that's there? Because who is it that has a first round grade? Christian Barrymore, I think he's like projected as like roughly the 15th best player in the draft, which falls right in line with their pick at number 15 if they were to fall in that order per se. So I was curious as to like what you thought about that, or if that's just people like stressing about how the Patriots are going to go in this draft. So let's talk about round number 1. I really want to focus on, like we did the other day, we'll focus more so on the 3 rounds. I'm going to let you really shine if you have guys later in the draft. The Patriots are your team, so I know that you'll have a really good insight on them. The first round, I feel like, is such a mixed bag for New England. It could literally go any way. Some people are saying that they're not going to trade up. I've seen mock drafts that have them trading up to number 4. I've seen them trading up to like number 7 or 8 or something like that to go after Justin Fields. But Justin Fields seems to be the guy that keeps getting connected to New England. At this point, and you said this the other day, the draft really doesn't start until pick number 4. Everyone else is just taking a quarterback, and it almost feels like it's going to be Trevor Lawrence, then it's going to go Zach Wilson, and then it's going to be Mac Jones. I know that the 49ers just went and saw Justin Fields at their pro day, but everyone really keeps tying the 49ers to Mac Jones. So with the assumption that Justin Fields is available for round 1, I'm looking at a few different players. If we're going to go with what everyone is trying to predict here, and somehow the Patriots trade up for Justin Fields, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea. I think he'd be the perfect guy to learn behind Cam Newton. Cam Newton would make a really good sort of teacher for Justin Fields. He's kind of been scrutinized in a similar fashion. And I'm not saying that Justin Fields has been scrutinized, but he's almost being slighted right now. He went from being like the number 2 guy to all of a sudden he's going to be the number 4 guy. So I think Cam Newton can kind of relate to him on that. He's kind of been through the ringer the last few years of his career, so he can really help Justin Fields through highs and lows. He's been to the top of the mountain. He played in the Super Bowl. He was the MVP at one point, the best quarterback in the league. So, I think that Justin Fields going behind Cam Newton would be good. As for wide receiver, you said it earlier. If they were going to go wide receiver, I really don't believe in those first top 3 wide receivers being there for the Patriots to snag at 15. I don't think Belichick would trade up for a wide receiver given his inability to draft and produce actual wide receivers aside from Julian Edelman. So I'm looking at somebody like maybe Rashad Bateman or Elijah Moore. I feel like that's more realistic. And even if they don't go for them at 15, if they trade back a few spaces, if someone's hungry trying to move up and they think that they could snag them and like picks like 20 to 25 and keep themselves in the first round, I could see something like that. As for interior D-line, I would assume that if they're going to actually do that, and again, I don't really think they should, but I guess that they're eyeing Christian Barrymore if that's where they would go IDL, but that's kind of like where I'm looking for first round for the Pats.
Yeah. So in the first round, I think the first round is going to be super key in determining where they're going to go the rest of the draft.
Definitely.
Once that first night comes, we see who they pick. It's going to be a lot easier to make predictions on what they go. It's kind of a wide open. There are a lot of different ways I could see them going. The only way I see them, like you said, I don't see them trading up to take a wide receiver. Belichick's pride, like I'm sure he would be crazy enough to do it, but I don't foresee him doing that for Jamar Chase or Devontae Smith. And there's a chance Waddle could be there for you at 15. There's a chance he slides a little bit given his injury concerns over the past few years. But other than that, there's no real wide receiver that you're willing to take at 15. There are a couple of good ones that you could see go towards the top of the second round, but no one really I could see going there at 15 besides the top three. But besides that, another name I've been seeing that's been tied to them a lot is a guy like Micah Parsons out of Penn State. He's a guy that could slip with the run on offensive players that we're probably going to end up seeing, especially at the top of this draft. We're seeing the receivers, the offensive tackles, the quarterbacks go. So we could see a guy like Micah Parsons slip, especially a guy who didn't play last year, opting out of Penn State. So that's another option we could see out there as well. So that would be a really great option for them. With Dante Hightower going into the last year of his contract, having a guy who can play sideline to sideline could be a monster linebacker. With Belichick's had no problem developing linebackers.
Yeah,
so
that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, you see guys like Dante Hightower, Juwan Bentley. You've seen guys like Brewski come through, Mike Vrabel, like linebackers. New England is linebacker U right now, I think that's a great spot for a linebacker to end up. So I think Micah Parsons could be good there for them. Another option I could see them going is the cornerback. It'll be interesting to see how the cornerbacks are rated. A guy like J.C. Horn might be available to them at number 15. Obviously, a guy at South Carolina. Had some comparisons drawn to Stephon Gilmore, so if you do end up trading Stephon Gilmore, getting Stephon Gilmore too wouldn't be a bad option. And then you see a guy like Caleb Farley out of Virginia Tech, who's seen as probably the highest upside of all the corners, but obviously not playing last year and making a recent switch to quarterback. He has less knowledge, but he does have probably the highest ceiling out of all of them, given his physical capabilities. Mm-hmm. And you have a guy like Patrick Surtain, who coming out of Alabama, obviously Saban and Belichick have a connection there, so that'd be another great option for them as well. If one of the corners is there, I could realistically see them taking any of the top three. And then the big question mark is quarterback. We could see them trade up. That's not out of the realm of possibility. We've seen Belichick do a lot of things this offseason we've never seen him do before, so I'm not discounting anything. I think 4 is probably out of the reach, given what Belichick has been willing to give up for draft day trades in the past. I think 4 might be a bit too crazy for him. I think we see if a guy like Fields slips to like 7 or 8, it slips to like 7 or 8. We could see them trade with the Carolina, with the Detroit. That would be a lot more realistic. You wouldn't have to give up nearly as much to get 7 or 8, especially at 8 with Carolina. Carolina just traded for a quarterback and still being a young team, so just giving them more picks. Because the Patriots have a ton. They have multiple 4th-round picks. They have multiple late-round picks. So giving up a couple picks for the 8th pick wouldn't be nearly as big a reach for them. So we could see if Justin Fields slip, or maybe a Trey Lance slips and they fall in love with Trey Lance.
I like that you said the number 8 trade with Carolina if that was to happen, because I see people putting Carolina still drafting a quarterback after trading for Sam Darnold. And what a ridiculously backwards thing that would be if they were to do that. To not only trade for Sam Darnold, pick up his 5th-year option, and take a quarterback in this draft? Like, what are you doing? No. I like that. The trade with the Panthers, I think, is super realistic. I like that. That's actually a really good thought.
Yeah. And another one they've been linked to was a trade with Dallas at 10. Obviously, with Denver picking at 11. If a quarterback, one of the top five quarterbacks makes it to Denver at 11, I think we could see John Elway pulling the trigger on that. So
Definitely.
10 is probably the last spot where we see if one of the quarterbacks is slipping. That's probably the last spot we could see a trade because obviously they make it to Denver at 11. I think there's about a 0% chance we see any of the top five quarterbacks make it past that 11. So by the time 12 rolls around, all the top five quarterbacks are going to be out. And then from there aren't any real quarterbacks you'd be willing to risk a first round pick on unless somebody might fall in love with somebody. Like we could see somebody fall in love with a Davis Mills. I actually been researching that, and apparently Pittsburgh loves him as a big quarterback to sit for a year behind Ben Roethlisberger. So we could see him in the first round, but I think 15 is way too high for Davis Mills. But it'll be interesting to see what Belichick does. Jerry Jones doesn't seem like the type of guy who likes to trade back. He seems like the uber aggressive, so we could see Jerry Jones trade back and then trade back up into like maybe the 60 to 20. That sounds very Jerry Jones-esque.
Yeah.
He likes to do things big, so be interesting to see what happens there.
That's such a Cowboys thought right there. Yeah, Jerry Jones trades back just to trade right back up. I could see something like that. Well, the thing is like, it didn't really like not cross my mind, but it didn't really like click to me just how realistic, I guess, the possibility of the Patriots trading up is, because they have a first rounder, a second rounder, a third. They have 3 fourth rounders, and then they also have the 2 6, and then they have one in the other rounds 5 and 7 too. So they do have a lot of extra capital where they could theoretically like put in some massive package where they're like, here's all our fourth rounders, and here's like the third rounder is technically like they got that's a comp pick for Brady. So I mean, that's almost like they weren't going to have that I guess maybe they were planning to have that since they knew Brady was going, but like you get that pick because of Brady, so you didn't have it initially. That's kind of like a throwaway pick. You could realistically trade a rate if you wanted to try to like put that into some package deal to slide up. So it wasn't until I sat down and like put this all together that I really saw, okay, the Patriots trading up for somebody like Justin Fields, I guess, isn't that unrealistic. So let's talk about round number 2. I have a couple different guys that are listed on here that I picked out specifically. I think that somebody like, and again, I'm going with the interior defensive line thing just based off of why, because I keep hearing people linking them to interior defensive linemen. Someone like Marvin Wilson out of Florida State, he had a down year in 2020, but the 2 years prior, PFF graded him 90 plus. And he was really disruptive. I guess he dropped some weight going into the season and played a different position on the interior. So some people were saying that maybe that was the cause for his slip. The other guy that I have on here, I didn't pick a safety or any defensive backs in the first round just because I felt like and you might know better than I do on this one. I can't remember the last time the Patriots went first round secondary. I don't know if there's somebody that I'm not thinking of.
Devin McCourty.
Devin
McCourty was a first round pick. I think he was like 29.
Yeah, what was that, 2009?
Not quite that long ago.
10, 11? He's been around 10, 11, something like that. A long time ago, per se. So
yeah.
It's just not the status quo for New England to go secondary in the first round. So Richie Grant from UCF, the only real knock I could find in him is people just don't think he's fast enough and that he can't cover the field enough or quickly enough. So those are the 2 guys I have. I like the Richie Grant pick. I think that's that just seems more like a second round pick for New England. I don't think that they're going to target quarterback in the second round. Like you were saying, outside of those top 5 quarterbacks that are probably going to be gone within the first 11, 12 picks, there's nobody that I could see really worth a second round pick at quarterback unless, the Patriots are all about Kyle Trask or something internally, and they're just hoping that he slips far enough to them. But, I know that some people have tied him to Pittsburgh. Davis Mills, you said Pittsburgh's interested in. That was where I kind of picked up on his name when we were talking about the Steelers the other day. So I'm curious to see what they do with the quarterback position if it's not in the first round. And I actually have a point to be made about this a little bit later, so we'll get into that afterwards. But what are you thinking for round number 2? Safety or IDL kind of makes sense for me.
Yeah. Safety is probably the biggest position I have circled for them in the second round. I think a guy like Trevon Moehrig out of TCU, exactly what Belichick is looking, a guy with a lot of potential, home run potential, could be the next Devin McCourty type of player. Really intelligent player, plays very smart and sound. Just never really put together the type of numbers you'd want to see for a top tier safety, but a second round pick is definitely the type of place where I could see him going. But Trevon Moehrig out of TCU has a lot of experience on special teams, which Belichick is going to circle and say, oh, love that. Belichick has been a huge special team guy. They've had an elite special team group for years and years, and it's won them games in numerous cases. Like we see when New England won against the Chargers last year, they had multiple special teams touchdowns.
Matthew Slater might literally be the best special teamer I've ever seen. I feel like he has always been on New England, and all he really does is he's like a gunner on the punt team. Like, that's it.
Greatest gunner of all time, in my opinion.
Literally.
Argument for another day. The guy like Trevon Moehrig could be really good for them. A guy to develop for a year under Devin McCourty, and then after Devin McCourty leaves. So Moehrig would be good. Then also cornerback could be another place they could go. I can see him going. Tyson Campbell out of Georgia. That's another type of player, a bigger cornerback, about 6'1", moves pretty well. That could be another option. I could see them as well. I don't think it's out of the question they draft a quarterback day 2. We see with Jimmy Garoppolo, that's what they did. They drafted a guy that people are high on, but was coming from not really a great place. We could see him go quarterback round 2. I could see him realistically going a guy like Kellen Mond out of Texas A&M.
Okay.
That's a guy a lot of people are very high on. He's being compared to Cam Newton just with a better arm, which could be fantastic. 4-year starter out of Texas A&M. Highly productive, played in the SEC, played against the Alabamas of the world, the University of Florida. So he's playing against NFL talent. That could be a guy as well. Davis Mills, I don't think is going to be there for them when they end up picking in the second round. I think somebody's going to fall in love with him. Big, smart guy out of Stanford. Only played 1 year, but is really productive. But I could see them going Davis Mills if he's available in the second round. Then from there, there are a couple of receivers who I've circled that I could see them going in the second round. There's one guy, Amari Rogers out of Clemson. Super talented player. Not really as big as you want to see, but the term that gets thrown around with him is thick and quick. So Amari Rogers isn't the tallest guy. He's about 5'9", 5'10". So he's not the tallest guy, but he's about 5'9", 5'10", 212. So he's very wide for his size.
That's big for 5'9". That's crazy.
Yeah. So he's very big for his size.
Thick and quick.
Thick and quick.
Thick and quick. Okay.
Moves well for a guy of his stature. Highly productive player, obviously playing with Trevor Lawrence at Clemson. He was his number one option this past year. So that's another great option for him as well.
He's got the big game experience too that like a team like New England can value more than maybe another team.
Exactly. Exactly. Then the last guy I could see them possibly going is a guy, Kenneth Gainwell out of Memphis. It's a running back, not really a position I've circled as a position of need, but Belichick has never been shy about drafting running backs at any point in the draft except the first round. Now, he drafted Sony Michel a few years ago, so never been shy about running backs. Always likes to have a deep stable of running backs on the roster. With Rex Burkhead leaving and James White only on a 1-year deal, bringing in a guy to learn from those guys. I know they have J.J. Taylor, who they seem to like on the roster, but bringing in another running back, guy like Kenneth Gainwell, super athletic guy out of Memphis, projects in that James White type of role where he's not really a lead back type of guy, but really solid pass catcher out of the backfield as well as runs very hard. So another James White type of guy, I could see them going.
Definitely. I could see that too. I feel like the Patriots are always looking for running backs. They've always had such a rotational type of backfield where, they don't need somebody in the first round other than like you said, they picked Sony Michel a few years ago. But other than that, like they're more of a team that just rolls with a bunch of running backs. And even with Sony Michel, like, has he really lived up to that first round moniker? Probably not. I would say he's had his flashes, but not quite what you guys were looking for picking him in that first round. So you brought up some wide receivers. I like the Amari Rogers one. I'm not sure if he's going to be there just because I like Amari Rogers. I think he might be like late first round, top 10 of the second round. Because if like all these teams are going quarterback in the first round in the top 5 or, top 10 or whatever it ends up shaking out to be, I think a lot of those teams are going to look for wide receivers to pair with those new young quarterbacks. So I almost feel like he might be gone by then, but he could slip. In the third round, I actually do have them looking at somebody wide receiver, Dax Milne from BYU. 2 drops last year. That's it. Strong hands. The only real concern that I was able to find is that people think that he gets a little bit bullied by stronger physical corners. If that's something he can overcome, or maybe he can work on his release coming off the line. I think that somebody like that, I mean, you want somebody who's going to catch balls, and especially in the Patriots sense, who have had some receivers that have dropped a lot of football. You remember when you guys had Brandon LaFell? I mean, talk about brick hands. I think that, the Patriots are a team that really is, they'll take somebody with sure hands over the speed and like deep threat ball. I mean, Wes Welker, Julian Edelman, those guys never blew people over the top, but they were getting 100 catches a year. So I think somebody like that would be really like a really solid 3rd round pick for you guys. I don't really have anyone else other than you said Kellen Mond in the 2nd round. That's like somebody I could look at. Maybe Davis Mills. I don't think Davis Mills goes 2nd round. I feel like he's probably he's like a late day 2 guy. I think he could fall even further. If somebody uses a 2nd round pick on him, or if like the Steelers really like him and they trade back to take him early in the 2nd round, that would be kind of crazy to me. Another guy that isn't really on teams' radars right now, but was good when he was playing, but he sat out last year, Jamie Newman from Georgia. I feel like a lot of people forgot about him. Pretty solid guy. Sat out last year, obviously, so I feel like he's kind of like an afterthought. But I'm thinking round 3, someone like maybe Davis Mills or Jamie Newman if they're sitting around there, because I'd be shocked to see Davis Mills go that early. Like you said, he only had a year of play time, so I think that's something that'll keep teams from being willing to invest too much into him.
Yeah, Jamie Newman's a guy I like, but coming from Wake Forest, where he produced well, but transferred to Georgia, never really got the opportunity to play, with him opting out this past year. But he's incredibly raw. He may not even be ready after a year of sitting behind somebody, so not really sure on him, like what his potential is. He's big, he's strong, he's fast, really great athlete, could be a really solid player down the road, but down the road is the key point there with Jamie Newman. But in the 3rd round, there are a lot of different ways they could go. I see them circling a guy like Tylan Wallace out of Oklahoma State. Uber productive, big hands, 5'11", 194, so a little small for an outside receiver, but incredibly productive at Oklahoma State through a bunch of different quarterback issues they had here. They had a bunch of different guys playing quarterback. They had a lot of injury issues, but 3 strong years of production. Not a whole lot of injury concerns, which is always a big plus. The real question of Tylan Wallace, obviously coming from the Big 12, you don't see a lot of NFL caliber coverage coming from the Big 12. Like I said, I like to call it the Madden League, where you're just chucking it downfield or handing it off to your elite speed running back and just going for it and scoring 60 a game. But I think he could be a really solid player for them. Rock steady production for these 3 seasons, and he's a really solid route runner too. So a guy like that in the 3rd round would be a great pickup for them. Another name I've circled is Dylan Moses out of Alabama, linebacker, elite. Cannot speak to enough about how elite an athlete this guy is. Coming out of college, he was a top linebacker prospect, 5-star recruit. He may be, and I'm not overstating when I say this, he may be a top 10, 15 athlete in this draft. If we were drafting just on athleticism, he'd be an easy 1st-round pick, but he's a little slight for a linebacker. He's only about 6'1", 225, which is kind of more of a running back build, but he definitely has
the linebackers are getting small.
Frame.
Linebackers are getting small, and they're getting quick. So in a few years, that's pretty close to norm.
Yeah. I think that's a great guy. Very high IQ guy. Played 4 years at Alabama. Played in all 4 years. Didn't start all 4 years, but incredibly productive. Team captain, good leader. So that's a very Belichickian type of guy. Loves taking those Alabama linebackers. Obviously, we see him brought in Anthony Jennings last year. We see a guy like Dante Hightower he brought in. Those Alabama linebackers always do well in New England. His chase speed is elite tier. I think he could be really good. So I think that'd be a great flyer for them to take in the 3rd round. Also has a little bit of injury concerns with him, but if he hits, that could be your replacement for Dante Hightower. Ability to play sideline to sideline would be impressive. That's another great option I have. Then from there, there are a couple different offensive linemen. I think that'd be a good spot for them to take an offensive lineman, get a good backup in, get a guy that could take some pressure off of your starters. Maybe a guy like Quinn Miners out of University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, not really a well-known program, but he was the talk of the Senior Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
He stepped right in at the Senior Bowl and played like a 12-year pro. If you ever want a really interesting YouTube video to watch, he used to work out in the woods. So I recommend looking those up afterwards. Really fascinating guy, strong as could be. Is probably a year or two away from fully being able to contribute to a roster. But that'd be a great guy to take a flyer on. You don't really have a hole in your offensive line right now that you need to plug, but down the road, those things pop up all the time with injuries and all that thing.
You can never have too many offensive linemen. As a Colts fan, I have watched offensive lines fail our team time and time again up until the last few years, and I have adopted the adage that you can never have too many offensive linemen, in my opinion. I think that's almost like severely underappreciated spot sometimes, because I've seen what can happen with a bad O-line, and in New England's case, adding depth to, I mean, you guys are sitting top 10 O-line, probably even higher than that. I'm just guessing off the top of my head. To add some depth to that, I could definitely see that being a good spot for them to go. Especially Quinn Miners, if he gets his fundamentals down, dude, he's going to be good because he's a beast. He's an absolute beast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's a joy to watch. Then I just have two more really quick names and we go through that I could see them targeting in the third round. Marvin Wilson, who you mentioned, I think he'll be there for him in the third round. Another great option. Big guy, 6'4", 303, multiple years of starting, so he has experience. Didn't have really the year you would have liked him to, but bringing in a guy like that, even if you're not playing him all the time, just to learn behind guys like Lawrence Guy, Davin Godchaux, would be another great option for him as well. The last name I want to mention is Elijah Molden out of Washington. Really, really passionate. You can see like how much he loves the game just watching him play. Coming out of Washington, which past few years we've seen a lot of guys get drafted out of Washington and have NFL success. Kind of a bit of a tweener, but the Patriots have had no problem drafting those in the past. Can play some corner, can play some safety. Just a really good football player, really good football guy. So I think that could be another great option for them as well.
I liked the Marvin Wilson one. I thought second round because I thought maybe he would be gone before that third, but if he does slip, I want to look into the reason why his play slipped more, because when I started researching him, I only kind of like grazed the surface a little bit, and it has something to do with him dropping weight to play a different position, I guess. But the previous 2 seasons before that, like I had said, PFF graded him 90 plus, and he was like a terror. So I want to find out more about what actually happened for his little fall off last season and what exactly that was all attributed from. And then I guess for like super late rounds, or is there anyone in specific? Since you're a Pats fan, I want to get your little like idea on this one. If there was one person that you could have the Patriots take in the draft anywhere, and if there's someone late, or if it's it's a sexy pick in the first round, who do you want to see them go after? You're speaking to all the Patriots fans right now.
Yeah. It's a really tough call. I think I'm gonna have to go with. I think it's tough not to go with. I absolutely love Trey Lance. I think he could be an absolute stud in this league for a long time. Big, strong kid. Loves the game of football. Massive arms, 6'4", 224. So big, strong build. Plays a very similar style of game to Cam Newton. So great guy to learn behind him. If you can get him, I think that'd be great. He's not going to be ready to start day one. He's probably going to need a year to sit, and not just a year to maybe he plays towards the end of the year, like a year to sit and watch the entire game. Obviously, only playing one game with the FCS not having a season last year. It's definitely going to hurt his growth. But I think having him sit for a year with Stidham as the backup, if you need somebody to go in for Cam Newton, I think could make all the difference in the world. I think he could be really good for them down the road and for years to come. Still a very young kid, but definitely incredibly projectable, strong character, checks off all the boxes you need, a strong leader, even though he wasn't the oldest guy on the team. I think that could be a home run pick for them that could lead them into the next generation of Patriots football.
Interesting. Trey Lance. I was not expecting Trey Lance. You know what's funny is I have not really seen anyone tie the Patriots to him. I was scrolling through mock drafts, like I think it was yesterday or the day before, and I saw, I like glazed over one that had Trey Lance, and I was like, I don't think the Patriots are looking at him. NDSU, man, just low-key producing some solid quarterbacks, and they're not even an FBS team. So that's really interesting. I like that. Trey Lance, that's a good pick. I like that. I think that does it for all the draft breakdown, unless you have any other names you want to throw out there. That's about everything I got written up for that. I don't have any other news to really talk about, too, outside of, the Julian Edelman stuff and the NFL and the NFLPA getting ready to throw fists over whether they're having an off-season program or not. There's not really too much else going on. So with that, I will leave you guys off for the rest of your Thursday. Eli, as always, pleasure to have you on the show. Love having you break down, especially the Patriots. I was like, this is perfect. I'm sure he'll be able to spit off guys I didn't even consider. As always, remember, you can find us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You name it, we're probably there. On top of that, we're posting up videos of just kind of like draft breakdowns in between live days. We're live every Monday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. But in between that, either clips from the show or just outside recorded things of other news that's going on will be going up as well in the coming weeks. But that is it for today. Again, thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Ethan. To my left is Eli. Thank you all for watching. Have a good... Oh, I just muted my mic there. Have a good rest of your Thursday, everybody.
Thank you again.